I thought the worst part of running was the fear, but I was wrong. The worst part is the moment you realize there's nowhere left to run. The mud sucked at my shoes with every step, thick and cold, like the swamp itself was trying to pull me under, and my lungs burned as I dragged in sharp, uneven breaths that tasted like rain and panic. Emily, I can't. Lily's voice cracked behind me, small and breaking, and I tightened my grip on her hand without slowing down, even though my legs felt like they were about to give out after what had to be miles of stumbling through trees and water and darkness that never seemed to end. You can? I whispered, even though I wasn't sure if I believed it anymore. Just a little farther. Somewhere behind us, far enough to almost feel safe, but close enough to still matter, a sound echoed through the trees. Low, mechanical, wrong in a place that should have been nothing but insects and wind, and my heart slammed harder against my ribs. He was still out there. Or they were. I didn't know anymore. I just knew we couldn't stop. The road had disappeared 10 minutes ago, swallowed by trees and shallow water, and I remembered the rusted sign we'd passed in the dark. Private property, barely visible through the rain before I'd veered off anyway, because staying on the road meant being found. And I would not let that happen. Not to her. Lily stumbled, her small body jerking forward as her foot caught on something hidden beneath the water, and I turned just in time to catch her before she went down completely, her weight hitting me harder than it should have for someone so small. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice trembling, and when I looked at her, really looked, I saw how pale she was, how her lips had lost their color, how her eyes struggled to stay open. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with running. Hey, stay with me, I said, crouching slightly, brushing wet hair from her face with shaking fingers. She nodded, but it was slow, too slow. That's when I saw it, the light. At first, I thought it was lightning reflecting off the water, but it didn't fade. It grew, a steady beam cutting through the fog ahead of us, too precise to be natural, too still to be anything but deliberate. My breath caught. Do you see that? Lily whispered, barely audible. I did, and I didn't know if that made things better or worse. Every instinct I had told me to turn around, to find another way, but there was no other way. Behind us was danger we understood. Ahead was something else. I swallowed hard, tightening my grip on her hand again. We go toward it, I said quietly, even as doubt coiled tight in my chest. One step, then another. The light grew brighter, sharper, until it wasn't just a glow anymore. It was headlights, cutting through the swamp like a blade, blinding and sudden and impossibly close. I froze. Lily did too. The engine idled low, steady, controlled, and for a second, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then the driver's door opened, and everything changed. The man who stepped out of the vehicle did not rush, did not speak, did not even glance around like someone surprised to find two strangers standing in the middle of his land in the middle of the night. And that was what made my chest tighten the most, because people who were afraid reacted, but he did not look afraid of anything at all. He closed the door behind him with a quiet, deliberate motion, the sound barely audible over the soft hum of the engine. And for a second, I thought maybe he would just get back in and leave. Maybe we were not important enough to matter. But then he lifted his head, and his eyes found mine through the rain and the distance and the dim glow of the headlights. And I felt it, that strange, heavy stillness that settled into my bones like something had just shifted in a way I could not undo. I pulled Lily closer instinctively, her small hand cold in mine, her body leaning into me as if she could already sense what I was only beginning to understand, and I took a step back without thinking, my shoes sinking slightly into the wet ground. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Everything about him suggested he missed nothing. He was tall, taller than most men I had ever stood this close to, his silhouette sharp against the light, his posture straight in a way that felt controlled rather than stiff. And even from here, I could see the clean lines of his dark coat, the kind of clothing that did not belong anywhere near a place like this unless the person wearing it owned the place entirely. He did not ask if we were lost. He did not ask if we needed help. He simply looked at us. And in that look was something I could not name, something that felt less like curiosity and more like evaluation, like we had just stepped into a situation where the rules were already written and we were the only ones who did not know them. Please, I managed, my voice thinner than I wanted it to be, but I did not step forward, did not move any closer than I had to. We are just trying to get out of here. The words sounded weak the moment they left my mouth, like they did not belong in this place either. He tilted his head slightly, not in confusion, but in consideration, as if he was weighing something invisible between us, and for a brief second I thought he might ignore me entirely. Then Lily swayed beside me. It was small, almost nothing, but I felt it through our joined hands, the sudden shift of her weight, the way her fingers loosened just enough to make my heart jump. "Lily," I whispered, turning toward her, and that was all it took. The man moved. Not fast, not sudden, but precise, each step measured as he closed the distance between us with an ease that made it clear this was not unfamiliar ground to him. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to pull Lily away, to create space, but my body did not cooperate, and before I could decide whether to trust or run, he was there, close enough that I could see the details now. The sharp cut of his jaw, the calm in his expression, the kind of calm that did not come from comfort, but from control. His gaze dropped to Lily, then back to me, and for the first time, he spoke. "She is not okay." His voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that did not need to be raised to be heard, and something in the certainty of it made my breath catch. "I know," I said quickly, tightening my hold on her, as if I could keep her upright by force alone. "I just need to get her somewhere safe." The word safe felt fragile in my mouth, like it did not belong anywhere near him, and yet he did not react to it the way I expected. He stepped closer instead, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him against the cold night air, and before I could stop him, before I could even think, his hand reached out, not toward me, but toward Lily, his movements careful, deliberate, as if he understood exactly how close I was to pulling away. "You already did," he said quietly, and for a moment I did not understand what he meant, not until I realized where we were standing, not until I looked past him at the vehicle, at the faint outline of structures deeper in the trees, hidden but unmistakably there, and something cold settled in my chest, because I suddenly knew that whatever this place was, it was not something you stumbled into by accident, and it was not something you simply walked away from either. I did not remember letting go of her hand, but suddenly she was not holding on to me anymore, and the space between us felt too large, too fast, like something important had already slipped out of my control before I could stop it. "Wait," I said, the word catching in my throat as he moved, not with force, not with urgency, but with that same quiet certainty that made everything feel decided before it even happened. And then Lily was in his arms, her small body resting against him as if she weighed nothing at all. I froze. Every instinct I had screamed at me to take her back, to put distance between us and him, but I could not ignore what I saw either. The way her head fell gently against his shoulder, the way her breathing, uneven just seconds ago, seemed to settle slightly, like even her body recognized something my mind refused to accept. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharper now, fear pushing past exhaustion, and he did not look offended, did not even look surprised. He only adjusted his hold on her slightly, careful, precise, like he had done this before. "She needs warmth," he said simply, as if that explained everything, and then he turned, not toward the road we had come from, but deeper into the trees, toward the faint shapes I had barely noticed before. "No," I said quickly, stepping forward, my shoes slipping slightly in the wet ground as I reached for Lily again. "We are not going anywhere with you." The words felt stronger than I expected, but my hands were still shaking, my heart still racing in a way that made it hard to think clearly. He stopped, not abruptly, just enough to acknowledge that I had spoken, and for a second the only sound between us was the quiet rustle of leaves and the distant hum of the vehicle behind him. Then he turned his head slightly, just enough to look at me over his shoulder. "You do not have another direction," he said, his tone calm, not challenging, not threatening, just stating something that felt uncomfortably close to the truth. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out, because I knew he was right. I had known it the moment I saw the headlights, the moment I realized where we were, and that knowledge sat heavy in my chest now, pressing down on every option I thought I had left. "You can stay here," he continued after a moment, his gaze steady on mine, "or you can come with me." He did not say what would happen if I chose wrong. He did not need to. I looked at Lily again, at the way her small fingers curled weakly against the fabric of his coat, at the faint tremor in her breathing, and something inside me shifted, something that had nothing to do with trust and everything to do with survival. I stepped forward slowly, each movement careful, measured, like I was crossing an invisible line I could not uncross once it was behind me. If anything happens to her, I started, my voice low, but he interrupted before I could finish. Nothing will happen to her, he said, and for the first time there was something different in his voice, not softer exactly, but firmer, like a promise he did not make lightly. He did not wait for me to respond. He simply turned again and started walking, deeper into the swamp, and after a second that felt longer than it should have, I followed, because I had no other choice, because every step away from him felt more dangerous than every step toward him. And as the trees closed in around us and the faint outline of a structure began to take shape through the fog, one thought settled quietly into the back of my mind, steady and unshakable. I had not found help. I had walked straight into something else entirely. The structure did not appear all at once. It revealed itself slowly as we moved forward, piece by piece through the fog. First the outline of a roofline above the trees, then the faint glow of warm lights spilling through tall windows, then the sound of something mechanical humming steadily in the distance, controlled and constant, like this place existed outside the chaos we had just run through. My steps slowed without me meaning them to, my eyes scanning everything, trying to understand what I was walking into, but nothing about it made sense, not out here, not hidden this deep in the swamp where no one should have built anything, let alone something this deliberate. He did not look back to check if I was still following. He did not need to. The path beneath our feet shifted from uneven mud to something firmer, gravel laid carefully into the ground, guiding us forward in a way that felt planned, intentional, like people came here often, like this was not some abandoned place forgotten by time, but something maintained, protected. That word settled heavily in my chest. Protected. By who? By him. The front of the building came into full view as we reached a clearing, and I felt my breath catch for a different reason this time. Not fear, but something closer to disbelief. It was not a cabin, not a shelter thrown together to survive the elements. It was a house, large and modern, all clean lines and glass and stone, the kind of place you would expect to see overlooking a city skyline, not hidden in the middle of miles of swamp. Lights glowed softly along the exterior, illuminating the path, the entrance, the surrounding trees just enough to remind me how isolated we still were. No neighbors, no road, no way out that I could see. He walked straight to the door, and it opened before he even reached for it. I stopped. That was when I noticed them. Two men standing just inside, dressed in dark clothing that matched his, their posture straight, their attention sharp, but not chaotic, not nervous, just ready. They did not look at me the way strangers usually did when something was wrong. They did not ask questions or show concern. Their eyes moved over me once, quick and assessing, then shifted back to him as if waiting for instruction. "She needs a doctor," he said, his voice calm, controlled, like he was stating something already decided, and one of the men nodded immediately, stepping aside to clear the way. No hesitation, no discussion, just obedience. A chill ran down my spine, subtle but undeniable, because I had seen that before, not here, not like this, but I knew what it meant when people moved like that around someone. Power. The door closed behind me with a quiet click as I stepped inside, and the warmth hit me instantly, sharp against the cold that had settled into my bones, making my skin prickle as feelings slowly returned to my fingers. The air smelled clean, faintly of something expensive I could not name, and the floors beneath my feet were smooth, polished, nothing like the world we had just come from. It felt wrong, like stepping into a different reality without warning. I turned quickly as he moved deeper into the house, carrying Lily without effort, and panic flared again in my chest. "Wait," I said, following him now without hesitation, because whatever this place was, whatever he was, Lily was still in his arms, and that was the only thing that mattered. He did not slow down, but he did not speed up either, just continued forward as if he expected me to keep up, down a hallway lined with soft lighting and closed doors until he stopped in front of one and pushed it open. Inside, everything was already prepared. A bed, clean sheets, equipment I recognized just enough to know what it was meant for. And someone was already there. A woman in a white coat turned as we entered, her expression calm, focused, not surprised at all, like she had been waiting. My breath caught again, sharper this time, because nothing about this was random anymore. Nothing about this was chance. And as he stepped forward and lowered Lily carefully onto the bed, his movements precise, controlled, I felt it settle fully into place, that quiet, undeniable realization that had been building since the moment I saw the headlights. We had not stumbled into safety. We had walked straight into something organized, something powerful, something that did not happen by accident. And the most terrifying part was not that he had found us. It was the growing feeling that maybe he had been expecting us. I stood there for a second too long, just watching, because everything inside me was still trying to catch up to what was happening, to make sense of how we went from running blindly through freezing water and mud to standing in a room that looked like it belonged in a private hospital, not hidden in the middle of nowhere. The woman in the white coat moved immediately, her focus entirely on Lily, her hands steady as she checked her pulse, her breathing, her temperature, speaking softly but efficiently, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. "She is hypothermic," she said, not to me, but to him, and that made my stomach twist in a way I could not ignore, because she was not asking permission, she was reporting, and he was the one she was reporting to. He did not respond right away. He just stood there, watching, his gaze fixed on Lily in a way that felt different from before, less distant, more precise, like he was tracking every small movement, every breath she took. "Fix it," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, and the woman nodded once without hesitation, already reaching for something beside the bed. I took a step closer, unable to stay back any longer, my hands hovering near Lily like I needed to touch her, just to remind myself she was still here, still real. "Is she going to be okay?" I asked, my voice quieter now, the fear no longer sharp but heavy, pressing down on every word. The woman glanced at me briefly, her expression calm but unreadable. "She came in early enough," she said, and it should have been reassuring, but something about the way she said it made it feel like a statement, not comfort. I swallowed, my throat tight, and looked back at Lily, at the way her small chest rose and fell more evenly now, at the color slowly returning to her face, and for the first time since we started running, I felt something shift inside me that was not fear. Relief. Small, fragile, but real. "You can step back," the woman added gently, already adjusting something on the side of the bed, and I hesitated, my fingers curling slightly before I forced myself to move, to give her space even though every instinct told me to stay close. When I straightened, he was still there, still watching, and for a moment our eyes met again, and I felt that same weight from before, that same unsettling awareness that nothing about this was accidental. "Thank you," I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them, because no matter what this place was, no matter who he was, he had brought her here, and that mattered more than anything else. His expression did not change, not even slightly. "You are here because you had nowhere else to go," he replied, not dismissing the gratitude, but not accepting it either, like he was correcting something I had misunderstood. The words settled strangely between us, and I felt my chest tighten again, not from fear this time, but from the realization that he was right. I had not chosen this place. I had ended up here because I had run out of options. "That does not mean I trust you," I said quietly, holding his gaze longer than I should have, even as my pulse quickened. Something flickered in his eyes then, subtle but real, not anger, not surprise, something closer to interest, like I had said something worth noticing. "It does not require your trust," he said after a moment, his voice steady, almost indifferent, but there was something under it now, something harder to ignore, only your presence. My breath caught slightly at that, the wording precise in a way that made it impossible to misunderstand. "Not your trust, your presence." I glanced toward the door without thinking, toward the hallway we had come through, toward the path that led back outside, back into the dark swamp, and for a second the thought of leaving flickered in my mind, sharp and desperate. Then I looked back at Lily, at the steady rhythm of her breathing, at the way her small hand rested against the blanket, and that thought disappeared just as quickly as it had come. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering just a fraction as the reality settled into place, quiet and undeniable. I was not leaving. Not tonight. Maybe not anytime soon. And as I turned back to him, that same awareness pressed deeper into my chest, heavier now, more certain than before. This was not a place you found by accident, and he was not a man you walked away from once you did. The room felt too quiet once the initial urgency faded, like everything had settled into a rhythm that I did not belong to. And the longer I stood there, the more aware I became of every small detail, the steady hum of the equipment, the soft rustle of fabric as the woman worked, the faint ticking of something on the wall that I had not noticed before. It was controlled. All of it. And that kind of control did not happen by accident. I moved closer to the bed again, slower this time, careful not to interfere, my eyes fixed on Lily as if looking away might somehow undo the fragile stability she had just regained. Her breathing was still shallow, but steadier, her face no longer as pale, and when I reached out and gently brushed my fingers against her hand, it felt warmer than before, not by much, but enough to make my chest loosen slightly. "She is responding," the woman said quietly, adjusting something near Lily's shoulder, her tone professional but not cold, just distant, like emotions were not part of her job here. I nodded. Even though she was not looking at me, my throat tight with words I did not know how to say. Thank you did not feel like enough. Nothing did. I became aware of him again without needing to look, the weight of his presence filling the space behind me in a way that made it impossible to forget he was there, and when I finally turned, he had not moved. Not really, still standing near the foot of the bed, still watching, his attention fixed in a way that felt almost unsettling in its consistency. "You should rest," he said after a moment, and the words caught me off guard, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Not an order exactly, but not a suggestion either, something in between that assumed I would listen. I shook my head automatically. "I am not leaving her," I replied, my voice quieter now but firm, and something flickered across his expression again, subtle but present, like he was noting that, adding it to something I could not see. "No one asked you to," he said, and before I could respond, he turned slightly toward the woman. "She stays here." It was not a question. It was not even a request. It was a decision, delivered in the same calm tone he had used for everything else, and the woman simply nodded once, as if that settled it entirely. My eyes shifted between them, the exchange quick but loaded with something I could not ignore, because it confirmed what I had already started to understand. He did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to explain himself. People listened anyway. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering just a fraction as the exhaustion I had been pushing back finally started to catch up with me, heavy and unavoidable now that Lily was no longer in immediate danger. My legs felt weaker, my hands still trembling slightly as the adrenaline drained from my system, and I reached for the edge of the bed to steady myself without thinking. "There is a chair," the woman said, nodding toward the corner of the room, and I followed her gesture, noticing it for the first time. A simple chair placed just far enough away to not interfere, but close enough to stay near. I hesitated for a second, then moved toward it, each step slower than the last, like my body was finally acknowledging everything it had been through. As I sat down, the weight of it all settled in, the cold, the fear, the running, the uncertainty, all of it pressing down at once, and I closed my eyes briefly, just for a second, just long enough to breathe. When I opened them again, he was still there, watching, always watching, and for the first time, a thought formed clearly in my mind, sharp and impossible to ignore. He was not just making sure Lily survived. He was making sure I stayed. I did not realize when I started watching him, only that at some point my focus shifted from Lily's steady breathing to the man who had not left the room, who had not checked his phone, had not spoken again, had not done anything except remain exactly where he was, like he had nowhere else to be and nothing else more important to attend to. That alone did not make sense. Men like him, whatever he was, did not stand still for long. They moved. They commanded. They controlled things beyond a single room. And yet he stayed. For her. Or maybe not just for her. The thought settled uneasily in my chest. I adjusted slightly in the chair, the quiet creak of the wood sounding louder than it should have in the stillness, and his eyes shifted to me instantly, sharp and immediate, like he had been aware of every movement I made even when he was not looking directly at me. "You are not from around here," I said before I could stop myself, the words slipping out in a low voice that felt too loud in the quiet space. It was not really a question, more like an attempt to break something that felt too controlled, too measured. He did not respond right away. He studied me instead, that same evaluating look, but this time it felt more focused, less distant, like he was deciding something about me rather than simply observing. "No," he said finally, and that was it. One word. Nothing more. I let out a small breath, almost a dry laugh, because of course he would answer like that, just enough to acknowledge, not enough to explain. "Then what is this place?" I asked, glancing briefly around the room again. The clean lines, the quiet efficiency, the people who moved without question. "It is mine," he replied, and the simplicity of it made my stomach tighten in a way I could not ignore. Mine. Not owned. Not managed. Mine. There was a difference, and I felt it in the way he said it. I leaned back slightly in the chair, my fingers curling against the edge of the seat as I tried to steady my thoughts, to piece together something that made sense, but every answer only led to more questions. "People do not build something like this out here for no reason," I said quietly, my gaze returning to him, searching, pushing just enough to see what he would give. "No," he agreed, and again, nothing more. The conversation felt uneven, like I was trying to pull information from a wall that only gave back what it chose to, and I felt a flicker of frustration mixed with the exhaustion already weighing me down. "You are not worried," I said after a moment, the realization forming as I spoke it. "About the people who were following us." That got a reaction, not a visible one, not in the way most people would show it, but something shifted in his posture, subtle but real, like I had stepped closer to something he had not intended to reveal. "You should be," he said instead, his tone calm, but there was something under it now, something colder, more precise, and my pulse quickened slightly in response. "I am," I answered, holding his gaze, refusing to look away even as that same instinct warned me I probably should, "but you are not." A pause. Longer this time. The room seemed to hold its breath again, the quiet stretching between us in a way that made every second feel deliberate. Then he stepped forward, closing the distance between us just enough to shift the balance of the space, not invading, not aggressive, but undeniably closer. "That is because they are not looking for you anymore," he said, his voice low, steady, and something about the certainty in it sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold we had come from. My breath caught slightly, my mind racing to catch up, to understand what that meant, what had changed, what he knew that I did not. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice quieter now, more cautious, because I could feel it, that invisible line I was getting closer to crossing. His gaze did not leave mine. Not for a second. "It means," he said slowly, deliberately, like each word was chosen with care, "you did not run into the swamp to escape them." A pause, just long enough for the weight of it to settle. "You ran into my territory." And in that moment, I understood something I had been avoiding since the beginning, something that made my chest tighten in a way I could not ignore. We were not hidden here. We were contained. The word territory did not sound like a place you could simply walk out of, and the way he said it made that clear without needing to explain anything further, like the meaning was already understood whether I wanted to accept it or not. I felt my fingers tighten slightly against the arm of the chair. A small, unconscious reaction, but he noticed, of course he noticed, his eyes tracking every shift in my expression like it mattered more than anything else in the room. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice steady enough to sound controlled, even if my thoughts were not, because that was the question that mattered, not where we were, not how we got here, but what came next. He did not answer right away. Instead, his gaze moved briefly toward Lily, toward the slow rise and fall of her chest, toward the faint color that had returned to her cheeks, and for a moment something in his expression changed, not softer exactly, but less distant, like her presence had shifted something in him that I could not fully understand. "Now," he said finally, turning his attention back to me, "you stay." The words landed heavier than they should have, simple, direct, but absolute in a way that left no room for interpretation. I let out a small breath, almost a scoff, because it sounded too easy, too final, like a decision had been made without me. "That is not your decision to make," I replied, even as I knew how weak that sounded in a place like this, under circumstances like these. His expression did not change. It did not need to. "You crossed into my land," he said, his tone calm, but there was something firmer beneath it now, something that made the air feel just slightly tighter, which makes it exactly my decision. My pulse quickened, not from panic this time, but from something sharper, something closer to defiance, because I had spent too long making choices for myself, for Lily, to simply hand that over to someone I did not know, no matter how powerful he seemed. We did not choose this, I said, leaning forward slightly, my voice low but steady. We were trying to get away from something else. And you did, he replied without hesitation, and that stopped me for a second, because he was right, in a way that made it difficult to argue, but it did not change what this was, what it felt like, what it meant. That does not mean we stay, I said again, more firmly this time, holding his gaze, refusing to look away even as the weight of it pressed down harder than before. There was a pause, not long, but long enough to matter. Then he stepped closer again, not enough to crowd me, but enough to shift the balance once more, enough to remind me exactly where I was standing and who I was speaking to. You are still thinking in terms of leaving, he said, his voice lower now, quieter, but somehow more intense because of it, as if that is an option you control. My breath caught slightly, just for a second, because there it was, laid out clearly, the thing I had been circling around without fully facing. Control. I glanced toward the door again, toward the hallway beyond, toward the unseen path that led back into the swamp, and I imagined it for a second, stepping outside, finding my way back through the dark, carrying Lily if I had to, pushing forward until we found something else, somewhere else, someone else. Then I looked back at him, at the calm certainty in his expression, at the quiet authority that filled the room without effort, and that image shattered just as quickly as it formed. You are not keeping us here, I said, but the words came out quieter than I intended, not as strong as before, and I hated that he could probably hear it. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at me, steady and unshaken, and for a moment I thought he might say something to contradict me, to reinforce what he had already implied. Instead, he said something else entirely. You are here because I am the only reason they will not come looking for you anymore. The words settled into the space between us, heavy and deliberate, and my mind struggled to catch up, to understand the full weight of what he was saying, not just about him, but about the situation I had run from. What did you do? I asked quietly, the question slipping out before I could stop it, because there was only one way he could say something like that with this level of certainty. His gaze held mine, unflinching, unreadable in a way that made it impossible to guess what he was thinking, what he had done, what he was capable of. I made sure, he said, his voice calm, almost indifferent, that your problem understands where it stands now. My chest tightened at that, not because I understood everything, but because I understood enough to know that whatever had been chasing us, whatever we had been running from, had just become something else entirely the moment we stepped into his world. And as I sat there, caught between relief and something much more complicated, one realization settled in deeper than all the others. We had escaped one danger, only to become part of another. For a long moment, I did not say anything, because there was nothing I could say that would change what had already happened, nothing that would undo the path that led us here, standing in a place that felt less like refuge and more like a line I could not cross back over. I looked at Lily again, at the steady rhythm of her breathing, at the way her small hand shifted slightly against the blanket, as if she was finally settling into something safe, and the tightness in my chest eased just enough to let me breathe without it hurting. That mattered. More than anything else, that mattered. She will wake up soon, the woman said quietly from the other side of the bed, her voice calm, certain, and I nodded without looking at her, my eyes still fixed on Lily as if I could anchor myself there, in something simple, something real. When I finally looked back at him, he had not moved, not even slightly, still standing where he had been, still watching in that same quiet, controlled way that made it impossible to forget who he was in this place. And after that, I asked, my voice softer now, not because I was afraid, but because I was starting to understand that raising my voice would not change anything here, would not shift the balance in my favor. His gaze held mine, steady, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world to decide what to say next. After that, he repeated, as if testing the weight of the words before answering, you stop running. Something in me tightened at that, a reflex, a resistance I could not fully suppress, because running had been the only thing keeping us safe for longer than I wanted to admit. You do not know what we are running from, I said, even though a part of me suspected that he knew more than he was letting on. I know enough, he replied, and there was something different in his voice now, not softer, but more certain, like the conversation had reached a point where explanations were no longer necessary. And I know that if you leave here, you will not make it far. The words were not a threat. That was what made them harder to ignore. They were a statement, delivered without emotion, without emphasis, just a simple truth that settled heavily into the space between us. I swallowed, my throat dry, my mind turning over every possibility, every option, every path that did not lead back to this moment. But they all felt thinner now, less certain, like they had already been erased the second we stepped into his world. You are asking me to trust you, I said quietly, the words slower now, more deliberate, because this was the part that mattered, the part that would decide everything that came next. He shook his head slightly, the smallest movement, but clear. No, he said, and his eyes did not leave mine, not for a second. I am telling you that trust is not what keeps you safe here. A pause, just long enough for that to settle. I am. The room felt smaller for a second, the air heavier, like the weight of that statement pressed down on everything else, and I felt my breath catch again, not from fear, not exactly, but from the realization of what he was offering, what he was implying, what he was becoming in the space of a single night. Not just the man who found us, not just the man who brought us here. Something else, something that stood between us and whatever we had been running from, something that replaced one danger with another, quieter one, more controlled, more certain. I looked at Lily again, at the faint movement of her fingers, at the steady rise and fall of her chest, and I knew the answer before I said anything at all. Not because I trusted him, not because I understood him, but because for the first time since we started running, I was no longer choosing between fear and fear. I was choosing between survival and something I could not yet name. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering as the decision settled into place, quiet but irreversible, and when I looked back at him, my voice was steady in a way it had not been before. We stay, I said, and the words felt heavier than they should have, like they carried more meaning than I fully understood yet. He did not smile. He did not nod. He did not react at all in any visible way. But something shifted, subtle and undeniable, like a line had been drawn and crossed at the same time. Good, he said simply, and as he turned toward the door, his voice lowered just enough that it felt like it belonged only to me. Then you should understand something. I watched him, my breath held without meaning to, waiting for whatever came next. He paused at the doorway, just for a second, before finishing the thought. You did not lose your way tonight. A slight glance back. Just enough. You were led here. And for the first time, the idea did not feel impossible. It felt inevitable.